Thank you all for coming. So this is the Building Brain Awareness Talk Series, and today we have Joel Goldstein. He's the executive founder of Brain Alternative Rehabilitation Therapies. Joel will introduce himself more, and you can take it away from here, Joel. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, this is pretty open, so we can have discussion as well. So thank you, Joel.
Thank you, Daniel. I think I'll start by talking a little bit about the BART Foundation. We don't say, well, it was easy for you to say, but it's
I
not easy for
tried.
anyone to say the whole thing. We just call it the BART Foundation. And my son, who had a catastrophic brain injury back in 2001, his name was Bart. And
Oh,
I should say he's gone now, but not from the brain injury. He made a remarkable and unexpected recovery, largely through the use of safe alternative therapies and some luck. And then he passed away during the COVID pandemic. People forget that more than a million people died. So he was one of those victims. The BART Foundation is a 501c3 uh, agency, meaning we are a public charity. We're a public educational foundation. Think of us as an online library. We don't sell anything. We don't offer anything except information. Our website, which is www.thebartfoundation, one word, thebartfoundation.org, has a number of what we hope are very useful resources, including one of the resources is a list of other organizations, other resources where you can continue your own research. But our mission, simply stated, is to determine which alternative therapies, which safe ones, are likely to work, are likely to help the brain heal. Where can they be found, and how can they be afforded? The thing that comes up by far most often at the website is where can things be found? Because even if somebody's heard about, let's say, hyperbaric oxygen, I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. They may not have any idea where to find it. After all, it can't be, you can't go to a hospital to get treatment for a brain injury. They may have hyperbaric chambers, and most of them do, but a brain injury is not an approved application. So to get a hyperbaric oxygen for any kind of TBI or other required brain injury, you have to go to an independent clinic, and the medical folks there can write a prescription off label and you can be treated. And there are thousands of people being treated right now. If you go to our website and you go to the tab that says therapies and you pull them down, we have 6 therapies that we're interested in and that we feel do give more than a fighting chance of better outcomes for survivors. What you'll find there are links where you can look up your own state, wherever you reside, and find where the nearest, in the case of HBOT, an HBOT facility would be. I'll just read, but sometimes I leave one out, the therapies that we currently endorse. It's hyperbaric oxygen, which is in a league of its own. Then there's photobiomodulation. I hate that word. I never would have made it up. That's something. Leave it to the scientists. They came up with the word photobiomodulation. They used to talk about low-level light therapy, and that's what it is. Photo is light, bio is organism, modulation means playing with more or less stimulation. So light therapy or photobiomodulation, neurofeedback, several different forms of neurofeedback have been found to be useful. Omega-3 fish oil supplementation. There's many possible supplementations, but in the case of omega-3s, there's a large body of evidence, and we give that on our site, supporting it as a very useful therapy. There's something called the PONS device. Most people have not heard of it. PONS stands for Portable Neurostimulation Device. It's a device, briefly, where you put something on your tongue, an electronic device, Well, I don't want to get lost in the details of it. Suffice it to say, it stimulates the vagus nerve. Okay, so you may have heard about the vagus nerve, and the Pons device is available for that. And then finally, craniosacral therapy, which is mostly a palliative therapy, but although it does help heal some of the symptoms of brain injury. And we also on our site talk about some emerging therapies that we're not ready to endorse, but we think people should be looking at. Things like transcranial magnetic stimulation and some others. So I hope you'll be able and interested in looking at our site, because there'll be a lot more you can learn there from any half-hour talk that I might. We hope you find the work there useful, and I'd be glad to take questions about it. And of course, you can send questions right to the website. There's a contact function there, and we'll respond. I've already indicated how I got involved in brain injury. It was Christmas of 2001. My wife and I got the call that every parent of a teenager dreads. Our son had been in a car accident. It was so bad that he'd been medevaced by helicopter downstate to Westchester Medical Center. We're in what's called upstate New York. And they were doing emergency brain surgery on him before we even knew he was injured. It was do or die. And we were grateful that the surgeon was willing to do that. He saved his life that night. But Bart was awfully injured and remained in a coma for over a month. And those of you who've experienced the coma watch know that it's a life-changing experience for everyone involved, certainly for Bart, but for the whole family. And ever since, we've all been really what I like to call the walking wounded. My wife, I, our daughter, Bart's adoring little sister. I'm not complaining, just saying everyone should understand that the whole family is swept away when in such a catastrophic event. Bart stayed in hospital and got all the conventional therapies for roughly 9 months. But after that long period, the school district came and evaluated him, and they agreed with the hospital, the rehab hospital. The consensus was Bart was so badly injured, that, especially cognitively, that he was not suitable for coming back into any kind of school setting at all. And he should simply go to a nursing home. And at the time, my wife and I really rebelled at the idea of warehousing our 17-year-old in a nursing home. And we fought hard to get him back into school and to be around at home and around people who knew and loved him. But it was a hard fight. And even when he was in school, special ed with all kinds of extra accommodations, he had a full-time one-on-one aide who was only in school half a day because he didn't have the strength for a full day. Even then, he was failing to meet all goals. He was basically falling asleep in class. He couldn't even stay awake. We used to joke that those were power naps because humor is vital. But they said, you got to take them out of here. You got to send them somewhere that's appropriate. And then we got really lucky. And through a friend, a physician who's now on the board of the BART Foundation, we found out about hyperbaric oxygen. And in a very short time, actually after 5 treatments, 5 dives, as we call it, he was at least able to stay awake through the school day. And the school district relented and said, well, if he's awake, even if he's not making any progress, can't take notes, hardly knows what's going on, we'll let him try. And I should say, I'll fast forward. And if you're interested in the granular details, there's a book, I wrote it. It's called No Stone Unturned. There are many books called No Stone Unturned, turns out, but only one written by Joel Goldstein. You can get the granular details of his struggle and the family struggle to recover the first 12 years. And it's available wherever books are sold, but you really don't have to. And if you buy it, I'm grateful. We give the royalties to the foundation. But it is in thousands of libraries, literally thousands of libraries around the country. So you can probably find it. And that gives the further details of that. I'm not an expert, but I am a very well-informed layman in the area of brain injury because I've been reading about it for 24 years. I used to say, I wish I could spend some time at Club Med when I'm spending all this time at PubMed, the NIH database. And so I've learned a few things. And of course, we have experts on the board of our foundation. We formed the foundation several years later. I should say, fast forward, if you had met Bart a couple of 3 years ago before he passed, you probably would not have known that he had a brain injury. That's the kind of robust and amazing recovery he made. If you spent enough time with him, you'd probably find yourself scratching your head and saying, well, didn't I tell him I'm not a Yankee fan? Right? And that's because his working memory was a little sketchy, but he held a part-time job for the last 8 years of his life. He lived on his own. He had his own flat. He learned to play the guitar, which he had never done before, and played it well enough to jam with friends, and even in some gin mills sometimes. And he made a lot of new friends and went on with his life. In fact, when I spoke, I've stopped speaking live mostly since COVID. I've done a few events, but I used to speak around the country to brain injury alliances and associations. Bart always came, and he spoke with me, and he introduced his story, and then he would introduce me as the principal speaker. And we lay most of that recovery on HBOT. The other therapies I mentioned, I read the list. We did try most of them. And we were lucky that all the ones we tried seemed to help. In one case, omega-3 fish oils, we were so lucky it was 12 years post-injury. We heard from a fellow, excuse me, I just going to close my door because my sheepdog, I have an old English sheepdog. Sheepdogs, they're big galoot. He's a state certified therapy dog. He just retired. We got a call and a couple of emails from a fellow named Mike Lewis, who you'll see him mentioned on our website, several things, books he wrote, and he's now a member of the board too recently of the foundation. He is arguably the thought leader in the area of omega-3 fish oil use. He developed it for wounded soldiers in Iraq mostly. And he was a soldier. He was a full colonel in the Army, a West Point grad. And he contacted me. He said, Joel, you've done a good job. He read the book. So this would be about 2013. He said, you did a good job, but you could do better by massive supplementation with fish oils. And he's a salty guy. He's a soldier. He said, we give them enough fish oils to float an effing boat, right? We're talking about 15, 16 grams a day and then titrate it down. So I didn't rush to do it. I go by the rule, do no harm, but I did enough research and he convinced me that it would do no harm. This was 12 years post-injury. And amazing, even Bart was astounded. 12 years later, he regained the use of his right hand, which he had never done with all the other therapies. He had been evaluated by occupational therapists, and they said he had about 20% use of his hand, which wasn't much. So he adapted and he did everything as a lefty, and he coped. It wasn't pretty to watch him eat, but he ate as a lefty. Well, after 3 months on the fish oils, he started eating as a righty, and that's when he took up the guitar and he learned acoustic and electric guitar and made amazing, including some cognitive improvements that just check the literature. You can't make those improvements after 12 years, at least according to the literature. But in fact, he did, and you can. And when I told Lewis back then, I called him, I said, you can't believe it. We went out for Mother's Day, and to blow his mother's mind, because Bart was a bit of a showman, he picked up, what are they called, chopsticks, and he ate the Chinese dinner with the chopsticks. So he never regained full use of his hand, but we guessed that it was functioning at about 70%. From 20 to 70, it's a world of difference. So we were lucky with these therapies, and we wanted to share that same kind of luck with other survivors, and especially veterans. I'll get to them later. Bart wasn't a veteran. He was 16 years old when he was hurt. And that's where the foundation came, in a way of spreading word about safe alternative therapies. Of course, there are no guarantees. Whenever we went to a therapist, including the hyperbaric physician who helped us so much, helped Bart so much, she said, well, there's no guarantees. And I responded, because I was a businessman at the time. I said, if you gave me a guarantee, I'm heading for the door, because it means you're selling something. But if you think we have a fighting chance, and she did, and she was thrilled, and we actually dedicated the book to her. So, okay, that's the foundation. I want to try to answer two questions in the time I have. One is, if alternative therapies are so darn good, why are they still alternative? Why are they outside looking in? Why don't the physicians and hospitals embrace them and use them? That's the first thing I want to address. And that's a complicated question with a complicated answer. And then I want to talk some about the actual alternative therapies. I should say that what counts as an alternative therapy, and by the way, we have an operational definition that we use. I think it's widely accepted. Something is alternative if it's not part of mainstream medicine and it's not covered by insurance. And in this country, those go together, okay? And I should also say that what counts as an alternative therapy depends upon what country you reside. So, for instance, hyperbaric oxygen is still very much an alternative therapy here, but it is not in Israel. In Israel, where most of the groundbreaking research was done and where they're still best in class research, in Israel, it's simply part of standard treatment. If Bart had been injured in Israel, well, not back then, but now, he would be in a chamber as soon as he was stabilized at all, usually about 96 hours when the swelling is down. In China, much the same, and in several other countries in Europe. So it counts as an alternative therapy when it's outside mainstream, and certainly here in the States, it is. The central lesson of our experience with BART and with the foundation and with the book, writing, talks, and so on, is that for survivors of severe TBI or other acquired brain injuries, stroke, and so on, unconventional therapies are not merely a reasonable option. They are really a necessity, because mainstream medicine, for the most part, only takes us so far. And often for severe brain injury survivors, it takes us to the nursing home door, or if they manage to come home, the patients are often heavily medicated and whiling away long, empty hours with nothing to do except drive their families nuts. So in Bart's case, alternative therapies simply transformed his life. And I won't dwell on what his condition was like. I think most of you can imagine. He was, I'm being generous here, he was like the Walking Dead, right? When they said, don't come back to school. And he barely walked. Now, I still haven't answered the question about why the physicians and the hospitals don't embrace these therapies. And I want to suggest that modern medicine, which is a glory of mankind, I'm not trying to run it down, it really is a true glory of mankind. Modern medicine can be divided in three different groups according to usefulness. What I mean is, certain kinds of conditions, if you've got them, modern medicine can cure them, can heal you. You step on a rusty nail, it can heal you. You get bronchitis, it can clear it up, and so on. So there's an important category where modern medicine is just the thing. But then there's a second category where it can't quite cure what's ailing you, but it can manage it. There we're talking about things like arthritis and asthma. I have asthma, and I've been, how should we say, coping with it for like over 50 years. But I'm not cured, that's for sure, especially when hay fever season hits. You bang up your knee. Uh, I mentioned arthritis, asthma, acid reflux, Crohn's disease. I have a couple of nephews with Crohn's disease. You can get a lot of relief through modern medicine, but you can't get a cure. Okay. And then you come to the last and I would say most tragic category, and that's where modern medicine can't help much at all. Severe traumatic brain injury is clearly a case, but there are other cases that you're probably aware of, things like Huntington's disease or Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS. When you've got them, there's nothing for it. So our starting place, when we took a look at, and when we still look at alternative therapies for brain injury, our starting place is from a place of humility, namely that there are no great treatments available, maybe no really effective. Show me the medicine you can take that will cure a severe traumatic brain injury. That's our starting place. As I said, there are no guarantees whether we go through conventional medicine or alternative medicines. But here at the foundation, we try to adopt a perspective which we call Socratic humility. Well, I think anyone would call it Socratic humility. You may remember Socrates said something to the effect, this is roughly what he said, it seems that I am wiser than the rest, simply because I do not think I know what I do not. I do not think I know what I do not know. That's Socratic humility, and that's our starting place. We don't know what will help the brain heal and give us better outcomes. Given their inability to really help our fellow sufferers with traumatic or acquired brain injuries, given their inability to help, you have to scratch your head and say, well, why are doctors so reluctant? And I mean, they are. They run for the hills when you talk about alternatives. Why are they so reluctant to at least have an open mind and examine some of these therapies? And I said the answer is complicated, and I've known a lot of docs and talked to an awful lot. Well, the first and easiest answer is they stick with what they know, what they're familiar with. In fact, you might be surprised, but this is the truth, and nothing I say can't. You should research. Feel free. I'm welcome to your challenges. They don't learn about hyperbaric medicine. They've done many surveys. The average medical student or even resident hasn't spent even one day studying hyperbarics. Now, there's a specialization. If they become a board-certified hyperbaric medicine doctor, that's different. But the vast bulk, when we go to our primary care or even to our neurologist, they don't know any more about hyperbaric oxygen than they know about the dust on the far side of them. They don't know squat. So they stick to what they do know. And we'd all do the same. I think we all stick with what we know. We all have certain kinds of blinders on. In fact, I want to point out that if you look at the history of medicine, and I have spent some time reading about that, medicine is an extremely conservative profession. They do not embrace change, especially radical change. Now, I mean, there are scientists who may be physicians or they may be PhDs. They're out there pushing the boundaries. So leave them out. But they're like barely 1% of physicians. Physicians as a whole are very conservative. I'll just mention two things that we now take for granted that the doctors fought hand in glove. Heart surgery. I'm just old enough. I was born in 1949. That's when the first heart surgery was done at Johns Hopkins, first in the world. And look at the history yourself, but suffice it to say, they wanted to burn these guys. They fought them. There was an axiom in medicine that said, if you touch the heart, it is akin to death. And now, 75 years later, who's better than a cardiac surgeon? They're like gods, right? But it wasn't. They fought it like crazy. And I said, I have ulcers. I may have mentioned I have asthma. You'll know all about me. I have ulcers too. I got them in 2001, actually. Same thing. We have found out now, after pioneers fought and in many cases were driven out of the profession by the incredible resistance, we now know that many, in fact, most ulcers are infectious disease. It's caused by microbes. Well, that wasn't understood or believed, and they fought it like crazy. So we're looking at a profession, the doctors themselves, who are not inclined to embrace anything outside their narrow area of expertise. And so what do? What do doctors do? They still have to decide what to use and what not to use. So as a benchmark, as an easy tool, they use FDA approval. If something is FDA approved, they can use it. And if not, oh garbage. They just throw it away. It's simple, it's straightforward, it's efficient for them. I should say, to be fair to the doctors, because I don't want to pillory them, there are real risks involved for the doctors in using alternative therapies. For one thing, they already pay high insurance rate. Malpractice could go through the roof if someone sues, and someone always sues. Someone's not going to be happy with the results. And if they're sued for using an off-label application, that they could be bankrupted. Even more so, they could be disciplined by medical boards or local medical societies for unapproved off-label applications. And in extreme cases, and this has happened, in extreme cases, they could even lose their licenses. And in very extreme, and this has only happened once or twice, they could even be charged with criminal abuse by the FDA or some other agency. So for doctors, the barrier against using alternative therapies can be quite high. And I have heard from doctors, they have written me, not a lot, but some, and said, I'm really interested in say, hyperbaric photobiomodulation, but I'm worried about the consequences. And I can empathize. Maybe who wouldn't be? But given that there are no effective medicines for severe brain injury, what are we supposed to do? It falls to us, to the survivors, to their loved ones, to their caregivers, to try to keep an open mind, to think about this area outside the box, and explore cautiously and see if we can find any safe ways of improving on the prognosis. In Bart's case, who knows if he'd gone into a nursing home, maybe he never would have come out. We knew friends who were in the first hospital and in the therapeutic hospital along with us for months and months, and they ended up in the nursing home. And in every case that we knew, there's only a couple of cases, they died there. And they died pretty quickly. I don't know. Hard to say of what. Maybe you have a broken heart. You take people's hope away, and it's very hard to survive without hope. So at the foundation, we try to give people realistic hope, not pie in the sky. There's no guarantees, but things that may have a fighting chance. So it's up to us. But we have to have Socratic humility when we do it. We have to understand and believe that we understand the difference between what we know and what we really don't know. It's hard for doctors to have Socratic humility. We put them on such a pedestal in this society, not every system, that they begin, many of them, to think of themselves as God. I'll just tell a very quick joke. We probably could use a little humor in this relatively grim subject. My mother was a nurse for almost 50 years in a small, really, municipal hospital down in New York City. And she used to love this joke. She said, people are lined up getting into heaven. And of course, they're very well behaved because they're getting into heaven. And St. Peter is checking them in. All of a sudden, a little guy wearing a white smock, and he has a stethoscope, and he just marches on in right into heaven, doesn't wait on this long line. All of a sudden, these well-behaved people start to get a little uproarious. They say, hey, what's going on? St. Peter, Who the hell does that guy think he is? God? Peter says, shh, shh, shh. He is God. But sometimes he likes to play doctor. We have to keep Socratic humility. We can't necessarily expect the doctors to do the same. And they're going to fight it, most of them. They're going to fight these alternatives. Just think about chiropractic. I use chiropractic too. It's only recently, in the last decade or two, that you can get coverage for chiropractic. Because before that, if you heard the physicians, they said, it's quackery, it's no damn good, it's going to do harm. And acupuncture is increasingly getting acceptance. So there's a process, but it's a long, hard fight. To do nothing, to just sit and wait for the FDA is, as Jean-Paul Sartre said, to do nothing is to make a decision. And I hope you'll consider going another way. So at the BART Foundation, what we do is we adopt a Socratic approach, but also what we call a pragmatic approach. Its first principle is the Hippocratic test, which I mentioned earlier. Do no harm. But I should say, and we learned this early on, we learned this shortly after BART was heard, you can't trust your own judgment of do no harm. You can't say, well, it seems harmless, or use your own intuition. You still have to check with the experts. So we need the doctors. We still have to check with the docs to see if a proposed therapy is harmful. They're the experts. They're the ones that know. So when you check with them, and long before the BART Foundation, we had what we called an unofficial board. Doctors who we called and we'd say, hey, doc, I'm thinking of using hyperbaric oxygen. Do you think it would hurt BART? And several of them said, well, no, it wouldn't do any harm, but it would be a waste of time and money. And we said, thank you very much. Because we didn't care what their opinion was about effectiveness, because we had Socratic humility. We knew we didn't know. We knew they didn't, but they didn't know they didn't. So as long as we got a universal opinion that it would do no harm, we went on to investigate further, right? So if you can satisfy yourself that, say, hyperbaric oxygen, photobiomodulation, or neurofeedback is harmless, well, the question is it harmless and also useless? So you have to investigate further. That's where PubMed and Google Scholar, a lot of other things come into play. You have to really research it thoroughly. Once safety is assured, other vetting can include searching the scientific literature, which I've mentioned, but you want to speak to other caregivers, to practitioners, other responsible parties, including manufacturers. No money-back guarantees, no credible insurance of success. I've heard fairly recently, even though we've been at this for a long time, my son Bart and I spoke to the New York State Legislature, their health committees, combined hearings of the Assembly and the Senate, in 2015, advocating for hyperbaric oxygen for brain injury survivors, especially veterans. We have a bill finally now. That's a long time ago. That's 10 years ago. It's called the BART Law, tentatively, named for my son. And we'll see if we get it passed and funded to get hyperbarics for brain-injured veterans. But I heard maybe 2-3 years ago on NPR, a neurosurgeon saying, hey, hyperbarics, no, that's not evidence. And what he really should have said, what he meant was that it's not FDA approved for brain injury. That's really all he meant. And maybe he meant it hasn't been proven by prospective, double-blind, placebo experiments, trials, which that's changed now too. We have those, mostly from Israel. But that's all he was really saying. And so I want to talk a little bit more specifically about hyperbarics, because it made all the difference for BART. But I also want to focus on it for a couple of other reasons. One, it has by far the most scientific evidence supporting it of any alternative. Dr. Paul Harch, who some of you may have heard of, he's the dean of hyperbaric medicine in this country down in New Orleans. He compiled a bibliography of the clinical trials worldwide, and you can find it on our website. It's almost 40 pages long, single space, And it's not summaries of the studies, it's just listing the studies, the thousands of studies. Okay. The mechanism behind this therapy is extremely well understood at this point. And I probably, as I say, the evidence is there. And in BART's case, it was most effective. I should explain briefly, because you may not know what's involved with hyperbaric therapy. It was developed originally to fight the bends for divers. Diver who's come up too fast and got nitrogen in his blood, he's got the bends, goes into a tank, and the tank is pressurized and then filled with 100% oxygen. Now, the air we're breathing is only, about 21% oxygen. If you give someone 100% oxygen and put it under pressure, it forces far more oxygen into the blood and into the blood plasma than could ever be attained in the usual way. I don't want to go too deep down the rabbit hole, but you may remember the alveoli in the lungs picks up the oxygen, gives it to the red blood cell. These are normally how we get the oxygen. Well, forget about that. With hyperbaric oxygen, you're exposed to 15 times the amount of oxygen that you would normally breathe. I'm not saying 15% more or 150% more. I'm saying 1,500% more. Okay. And that oxygen goes throughout the body, to every cell in the body, but it specifically, from our point of view, goes to the injured area, in this case, the brain. And what they have found is that what the oxygen does, it helps the brain to revascularize, to regrow the tiny arterioles and veins that bring the oxygen to that area, sometimes referred to as angiogenesis, regrowing of the blood supply. And of course, when the blood gets in there, that does the real job of healing, whether it's in the brain or whether it's in a third-degree burn. It's used commonly for in burn centers. It lets the blood allows oxygen and other useful nutrients to reach the injured area. It helps the poisons that have been accumulating, the toxins, to be removed, and it allows for healing. I should say all of this, everything I've said recently about HBOT is not controversial because it's been studied in other uses like burns and stubborn diabetic foot ulcers. So we know this is going on. It also, besides the mechanisms I've mentioned, it reduces inflammatory reactions, enhances cellular function, especially mitochondrial function, and even increases the production of stem cells. All of that is established. What isn't established is it doesn't have FDA approval in this country for brain injury. But it is very widely used. I would wager that more than 90% of all the hospitals in the United States have hyperbaric chambers. And they're mostly using it for stubborn diabetic wounds to prevent unnecessary amputations. They're also using it for burns, but they're using it for carbon monoxide poisoning and a whole host of other smoke inhalation. So they're being used. They're just not being used for us. Now, I said this docs that I heard on the radio said it's not evidence-based. It doesn't have a good double-blind studies backing it. You'll need to take my word on this because we don't have the time here. But I wrote an article, and the article was written for Brainline a few years ago. If you look up the magazine Brainline, it's excellent. Brainline and my name. I've written a lot of articles for them. But find the one that's called, Is the Time Right for Alternative Therapies? Is the time right for alternative therapies? And I explain in detail in that article the difficulty in setting up double-blind placebo tests for hyperbaric oxygen. After all, it's easy to do if you're taking a pill, and one pill has the medicine that goes to the trial. One pill is only a sugar pill, and you give that to the control group, right? Well, it's not easy with a tank, and I explain in the article why. What the Israelis originally did, going back to the early 2000s, well, they did crossover studies, which are the next best thing. You have two groups of patients. One group gets hyperbaric oxygen. The other group gets nothing. Where I grew up, we would have said they get ugats. They get nothing. And then after 8 weeks of treatment, the second group, the group that's been getting nothing, they get the treatment. And what they found, this was published, say, in around 2010. They found a couple of fascinating, unbelievable things. It wasn't unbelievable to us because we'd already used it for BART, but we were glad to see these studies. They found two things. One, using subjective criteria, things like cognition tests and ability to sleep and depression and so on, the patients who got hyperbaric oxygen were much improved. And then perhaps even more importantly, from a scientific point of view, they did scans, SPECT scans of the brains before and after. And those scans were blind, meaning that the technicians who did the test didn't know, am I looking at the guys or gals that got the oxygen or didn't get it? All right. And what they were able to conclude very conclusively was that hyperbaric oxygen massively improves the blood perfusion in the injured portion of the brain. And I mean massively. And the studies, I cite the studies both in this article, but they're all over the place. We're talking about an average increase in blood supply of over 40%. Just think of what that means. I mean, you can do it yourself. You hold your hand, you hold it real tight as you can, hold it for a minute or two. Now, there's no damn blood in there. And then you release it and you feel, oh, the warmth, the blood, the life. That's what happens with hyperbaric oxygen and the brain. And the Israelis, they don't have to worry about the FDA, but they have very high standards. Some would say higher than ours. Very high scientific standards. They showed that for TBI, which was their initial interest. They were worried about soldiers being shot or blown up by IEDs. But they then went on to do similar trials for stroke, for other anoxic conditions. And then eventually they've even done it for PTSD. And they're beginning now with things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And it's hopeful for those. But I should say that for at least those first categories, stroke, anoxic conditions, and PTSD, they found exactly the same results. Blood perfusion. And then the neuropsych exams showed great improvement in the quality of life. And their conclusion, I want to read you their conclusion. This is from their study. HBOT can induce neuroplasticity, in parentheses, reactivation of quiescent stunned neurons, creation of new synapses and new axonal connections, leading to repair of chronically impaired brain functions and improved quality of life in TBI patients with prolonged post-concussion syndrome. And this this is in italics, at late chronic stage, meaning they didn't take people who are recently injured, because in the first year or so, you may see so-called spontaneous improvement, which just means we don't know what the hell happened, spontaneous improvement. So they only treated people who were years out, up to 5 years out. They precluded people in the first year altogether, and they found these wonderful results. So as of 2015, which is 10 years ago, when BART and I were talking to the legislature, in Israel, it's an important part of the standard treatment of care for almost all kinds of brain injury. If some poor person has a stroke, he or she is in the chamber as soon as they can, usually within 96 hours. So I asked the question, is it possible that in Israel, HBOT is scientifically valid and evidence-based, but it's not evidence-based here? Well, only if we define evidence-based as FDA approved. Only that. Yeah. What would any reasonable and prudent survivor or loved one do faced with this kind of evidence? I would suggest, I used to tell people back when we first started, they'd say, well, I can't get it. I just can't find it anywhere. To this day, I believe, as I told you, we have these lookup functions. I believe Nebraska has no independent HBOT clinics. So if you're in Nebraska, you just can't get there from it. You have to go elsewhere. In the early years, I used to tell people, well, why don't you just go to Israel? I know it's an expensive trip, but they only charge $25. I think it's up to $30 now for a dive, and you can get some help. Okay. Well, we don't need to go to Israel anymore. There's several hundred clinics, and there's an organization that we are affiliated with and that we work with in the legislature called treatnow.org. And there you'll find them on our website. You go to the news section, you'll read all about them. They're a veteran service organization. They have 159 clinics around the country, and they treat veterans for free. And they treat the rest of us at a steep, very steep discount. So I often send people there. Some people say, well, maybe we should wait till there's more evidence. And there are a couple of large-scale studies being done here in the States. One is done by Paul Harch out in Louisiana. I mentioned him. He's concluded his study. There's also one, it's called the Joe Namath study. Any of you Jet fans out there? Probably not. I'm long suffering. I'm a Jet fan. And there's a Joe Namath study in Jupiter, Florida. They're wrapping up too. Guess what? What are the Americans finding? They're duplicating the Israelis. Shouldn't be a big surprise. And that's important because American medicine only cares about what we do. Whatever they're doing in Israel, they may as well stick a feather up there, but we don't care what they're doing. But we're beginning to reproduce it here. I see I'm running out of time. I want to at least touch on all the other therapies I mentioned in the beginning are certainly worthwhile. They're worth considering. I hope you'll take a look at them in your own lives or in your own work. None of them are, well, like HBOT, most of the therapies I mentioned, like photobiomodulation and neurofeedback, they may be FDA approved, but for other conditions. So use of them would be off-label here. And I hope you'll have an open mind. I mentioned the omega-3s. I tend to think of omega-3 as the poor man's HBOT. The reason being, HBOT is basically the most expensive therapy. It's going to run $16,000 to $20,000 for a full course of therapy if you're not getting a discount. It's what we paid, and I was grateful I was able to afford it. And at the other end of the financial spectrum, omega-3 fish oils, you can get enough to treat reasonably for $200 or $300 a year. And we even have a discount. We're not involved in it. We have no commercial relations with anyone. But Barlean's oil, we convinced them to make their oil available to brain-injured survivors at basically at cost. So it's less than half what you pay in the store. You contact them directly. You can see that on the foundation. So the omega-3s are very affordable, and even more affordable if one uses our discount. The results that they're finding, and that Michael Lewis, who I said is the lead scientist on that, are similar to HBOT. Not exactly the same. The healing mechanisms are a little different. But as Lewis said to me at the time, and I said, he's salty, he's a soldier. He said, think of the brain as a brick outhouse. And he didn't say outhouse. You get the idea. A brick outhouse. And it is mostly constituted by fats and oils. And more than anything else, it's constituted by omega-3s, right? So when the brain is blown up, he was dealing with soldiers, most of whom had been blown up. If you pump in enough, and he was doing it right through JPEGs. These people were unconscious, so he was pumping it in, and he found, this is back during the war and toward the end of the wars, that he was taking people who were in vegetative states, and they were walking out of the hospital. Not fully cured by any means, but they went from a vegetative state to some kind of ambulation. As usual, I'm running late. I want to say that In closing, and I want to hear any questions and concerns. I wish I could say that if you adopt hyperbaric and these other alternative therapies, that you're completely out of the woods. It's probably not going to be the case. It wasn't the case for our son. He lived a very full and meaningful life. At his funeral, I mean, it's hard to believe, almost 500 people. They had to do it mostly by Zoom because we only had room for about 100. Right? That's the effect he had on people, but he still had deficits. Even had, I mentioned fine motor. Fortunately, he completely overcame the angry outbursts of the, let's say, emotional lability and instability. But so even with the use of these therapies, one finds one has to adapt a kind of new normal, but the new normal is incomparably better than settling. I think I better wrap up. I suggest if you have a chance, not only do you go to our website, but you may want to visit our YouTube channel, which has videos of thought leaders. It's just called the BART Foundation. It's got thought leaders in each of these fields. Most of them, we interviewed them ourselves. They were kind enough to agree to the interview, and some had already produced their own videos. And you can hear them speaking just on that. You can hear Mike Lewis speaking just about his experience with the soldiers. And since he's now in the civilian field, since he's mustered out. Otherwise, I should open it, Daniel, to you or to anyone else who would like to express a question or concern.
Thank you, Joel, and thank you for this thorough and personal and beyond presentation because yeah, everyone here I think has a brain injury, and we've all been there's so many things you said I want to touch on, but I'll ask a few questions. So from a brain injured side, we're in a hole in an invisible disorder, and it would be nice to have the people, especially the doctors. I just want to say what you said about their view as a whole is great because when I tell people that happens, they're like, it can't be all of them, and I say, no, it has been, and it's been very frustrating. But not only are the alternative therapies looked at through this misunderstanding and suspicion, but so is all of the problems with brain injury and the way we feel and the way we, because it's an experience internally, it's not something I don't know about, but it's hard to convince others of. So I guess the question is, how have you found a way to deal with that in other people and doctors and experts and professionals? Have you found a way to try to get them to be open-minded, or do you keep hitting that same wall?
Well, I think we hit the wall, but it is becoming more porous. And that's partly, I think, for two reasons. One, it's the rest of the world. America, we like to think of ourselves as exceptional, and we're number one. But, there are places like, if you, God forbid, you have to have a brain injury, hell, you'd be better off having it in China, right? Because China would give you H-spot, China would give you acupuncture, and China would give you modern medicine. I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek. I'm not saying, buy your tickets and go to China. But if you do a PubMed search, or you even do a search of current ongoing clinical trials, the vast bulk of the interesting alternative therapy work is overseas. Israel and China lead them, but it's everywhere. The Russians are doing it. Western Europeans are doing it. So that's beginning to seep in a little to the doctors. And the other thing are the veterans. The veterans are very important for two reasons. One, they sacrifice for us and we owe them the best care we can give them. And the other is they're a very sympathetic group and people care about them. And there are a lot of them. According to treatnow.org, you're looking at possibly, I mean, it's hard to believe, possibly 700,000 or 800,000 brain injuries from the last 20 years or so of war. Now, they're not all severe. Many of them are moderate. Some of them are just concussions. But, we know from football, multiple concussions can still be very, very disabling. And the veteran
That doesn't matter though, right? That criteria, severe, if you have it,
yeah,
you have it. And,
yeah, if you have it, you have it. I agree. So the veterans have become more vocal. Treat Now, you should look at their site. their site is more, I have to say this in all humility, more useful, at least when it comes to hyperbaric, than the BART Foundation. But we take a broader picture. I talked about our video. If you look at their videos, they have over 100 testimonials just about HBOT from Congressional Medal of Honor winners, from generals, from their own experience. There's a general, he was blown up in Iraq, and he had to be mustered out because he couldn't do his job at all. And then he got lucky. He knew some people who were doing HBOT, and he got a full course of therapy and eventually recovered. And he's practicing law, I think, in Florida. And he gave them a testimonial. So it's push, push, push. The wall, I mean, and you want to know why the wall? The wall is, as we said, it's the docs, and they are backed up by the rest of the establishment. That is, let's say the big pharmaceutical companies. They have a vested interest in continuing to sell, the Keppra for seizures and all the, the anti-anxiety meds and all the rest. It's a $1 trillion industry. And if there were, I said before, there is no cure, and there is none. But if these therapies take everybody out of the nursing homes and people who are currently home, get them, half of them to go back to work and get off their meds. We spent 8 years getting BART off all of his medicines. He died. He was using the last legal medicine, alcohol. But aside from that, he was off all that stuff. The military industrial pharmaceutical complex is not giving us a tailwind, right? They're a headwind. And I wish there were an easy answer. I mean, I didn't touch on everything we did for BART because there's only so much time. But for instance, he did very successfully, I would say, 3 semesters of cognitive therapy. NYU has they did the earliest work in serious cognitive rehabilitation, and some of it migrated up in the Albany area where we live. And he did 3 semesters of that, and he learned strategies to deal with some of these lingering issues. I mean, I don't remember all of them, but I remember the first one said, take a deep breath, right? And stop and don't react, okay? Well, so cognitive rehabilitation really should be available everywhere, either in person or online.
We'll take some more questions that people have hands raised. Thank you, Joel. Rachel, what's your question?
Hi, yes, thank you. This was incredible. Thank you. And my question is, I've been doing hyperbaric for a little less than a year now and continuing to do it, and it's been very helpful. And but one of my questions is, you had mentioned something about photobiomodulation. I've also done that, but I kind of stopped doing that a bit. And you mentioned something about the photobiomodulation that maybe was not so terrific.
I'm not sure what I said. I will say this. Like most things, there's photobiomodulation and there's photobiomodulation. Some is better than much better than others. There are several manufacturers. There are now a plethora of machines. There are some clinics. There's one in Texas. We did a webinar with a fellow. He does photobiomodulation with HBOT right in the chamber. Okay, I don't know why. If I were him, I would do one after another, and he's getting very good results. If you go to our website, there's no guarantees, but go to our website, look at the tab at the top called therapies, scroll down to photobiomodulation. We do list a couple of very reputable manufacturers. We have no vested interest in any of them, and also some consultants. And one I recall because I used her myself. Her name is Anita Saltmarch. You'll see it as you scroll down. She's in Toronto, and she did a talk for us as well. she's an expert. Was involved in many of the original clinical trials around photobiomodulation, and she can give good advice on what the best machine would be, what the best setting. There are some variables there, and I think if you don't get them right, it may not help that much. I'm using it myself a little for just, let's say, age-related issues, and I was a little depressed when my son passed away, and I was hoping for some relief on that. So I've been using it with pretty good results. And I have friends, one of them's on the board of the foundation, who's got Parkinson's, and he's getting pretty good results, but he had to switch machines to get those results. So I think it's like anything else, you may have to dig, and you may also have to get lucky. But I would look at that photobiomodulation website, a tab, and see if you can get some advice. Did you find it didn't help at all?
It was certain settings, some settings I felt good. I felt great. Other settings didn't feel so great. But
Yes.
yeah.
I think that's that's why somebody like Anita Saltmarsh, and I think I'll list 2 or 3 others that we know of that are doing that kind of consulting, mostly for free. Yeah, I don't have all the granular details at hand, but I know, for instance, if you can get 40 megahertz, you usually end up producing more alpha waves and feeling better, feeling more relaxed. And 10 megahertz may do certain other things, more specifically ambulation and better fine motor control and so on. So there is a science to it, and us amateurs could get that wrong.
One of the settings on the photobiomodulation is the inflammation setting.
Yes.
And, we have problems with inflammation with brain injury, and everybody seems to have problems, I would say, with inflammation. So that was a helpful setting.
Good. Yeah, no, certainly inflammation is the enemy for brain injury and all kinds of other things. So
Thank you.
You bet.
I'm 3 years into my injury, and a year in, I went to what was known in the local area as this TBI specialist that was supposed to be good with TBI patients. So in my search and effort of attempting to get better, I went to him. He did 16 hours of testing in 1 week, 4-hour days for 4 days. While he was doing the testing, all kinds of testing, eyes, nose, balance, tilt tables, the whole bit, he had me on this oxygen mask. And by the 4th day, it was the closest I felt to being normal since the accident. And I had asked him, and he was doing Wim Hof breathing and some other stuff. So I asked him, is it possible? And then the days after, when we were no longer testing, and I continued the exercises that he had me doing, the day following not being on the oxygen, and the day after that, I didn't feel the same. And I asked him specifically in an email, is there any chance this oxygen had anything to with my improvement or help me better? He goes, no, it can't be that at all. Well, yeah, he was wrong. And I truly believe that. And at some point I'm trying to, in this maze, in this journey, try to get to some type of either oxygen treatment or hyperbaric treatment for sure. Because I think that was probably a proponent or a whatever the right word is, because I can't find words, but I think that it was a key into tapping into what would have helped me had somebody recognized, I mean, it's like, and now after 3 years of doctors and specialists and 200 appointments, they don't know what they don't know. And you just have to keep plugging away and plugging away and plugging away. So anyway, having said that, I did have a question about your thoughts on the Wim Hof breathing technique. If you know anything about that, have you heard anything about it? Does it help? It might be here or there, I don't know. And then I'm probably gonna have to watch the recording for your answer, because I really got to get out to an appointment. I apologize for that. Thank you so much.
Okay, good, very good questions. First, Holly, let me say, I don't know much practically nothing about the breathing technique. So Socratic humility says I dodge that. I want to talk a little bit more about the oxygen experience you had and about maybe going forward. I mentioned if Nebraska doesn't have any independent clinics, but there are many other conditions. Our grandson, who's down in Florida, he's only 4, and he's autistic, and The studies in Israel and emerging studies here indicate that hyperbaric oxygen helps with autism. Not a cure, it helps. So what we did, but he's 4 and he's autistic and he's jumping around a little. So what we did was we purchased what they call a soft shell or soft chamber hyperbaric. They're not these medical ones that you'll see on our site and elsewhere, and that the medical grade HBOT can go up to over two atmospheres. Over 2 gets to be possibly dangerous because no therapy is 100% safe, not even an aspirin or Tylenol. But hyperbarics are very safe, properly done. So, but it wasn't practical for him to drive with his mother 45 minutes to a chamber. The only way to get him into the chamber was to buy a soft chamber. The soft chambers are not as good as the medical. They don't get to as high an atmosphere, but they keep inching up. It used to be up to a few years ago, you couldn't go past 1.3 atmospheres in a soft chamber, but the one we got for our grandson goes to 1.4, which is getting there. And the manufacturer that we bought it from has now introduced 1.5, which is, there is no internationally accepted standard, but 1.5 is the pressure that they use in all of these scientific studies, Israeli and American. So, and it's too early to say he's been taking the hyperbaric. Of course, his mother has to go in with him, still wants to play with his Legos and so on. But it would seem, and this is just an anecdote, it's not even a case study because there's no controls. It would seem that he's doing better. He's starting to speak, which has been, he doesn't have aphasia exactly, he's just autistic. He started the other day at school, the teacher offered him a food, and all we've heard him say is things like, even when we're down there, hi, bye, maybe hi, grandpa. He says that he didn't want the food, and he turns to her and he says, "Are you crazy?" Well, we were dancing a tarantella, the whole wider family. And is that the H-spot? I mean, I couldn't fairly or reasonably say, but we suppose it might be helping. So for people who can't get to a hard chamber, they should first check Treat Now, because Treat Now will use a sliding scale. So the average cost of one dive in an independent clinic is close to $200 a dive. And normally you need at least 40 dives. So do the math, it's expensive. And 80 is preferred. I should say the cost of an H-spot treatment in a hospital where they won't treat us anyway, so you can't get there from here. But if you could, let's say you're being treated for a diabetic foot ulcer, averages about $1,800 or $1,900 per dive. Almost 10 times as much. That's hospitals.
Thanks for sharing that. And there's one more question in the chat about, so someone's in Texas, how do they find this? But I was trying to look on your website. How can people, wherever they are, use your website to find resources?
I don't have it open, and I didn't arrange to do slides. You go to our website, www. Now, you open it up. It's the front page. Open page. On the top, there are tabs. One of the tabs is called Therapies. So you hit on that. There'll be a scroll down menu. Say if what you're interested in is HBOT, hit on that. There are 4 or maybe 5 links. I would always start with the link that says Treat Now, because they're the one that give discounted rates. The others are all perfectly legitimate, but you'll probably be paying $400 or $500. So you go. They're arranged by state, so you can skip Nebraska. But for instance, there's a lot of them in Florida. There's a lot of them in California, and that's for reasons that there's a lot of swimmers and divers in those states, and they're getting the bends and they need the treatment.
I put that link. I found it. I followed your instructions. Yeah,
good.
That's good that there are these resources, and it's crazy that each person still has to navigate this.
Oh yeah. Well, someday we have younger members. I'm the oldest member of the board. We have younger members who created the website and who keep it up to date. And we're hoping eventually they could combine some of those links and make it simpler, but we're not Google. We don't have those kind of, we're a charity. We depend on donations. So, but yes, for each of those therapies, there should be a way of finding links that will tell you where you can go to get them. If you can go to get them, there's some you just can't get depending upon where you live.
Yeah, there's a list in Texas. I'm scrolling down.
Texas
So,
has more than a few.
yeah.
Some of the early work was done in Texas, early America.
This is great that you're able to find these resources and connect them. And yeah, I have a bunch of stories about HBOT, but I don't know if we have time to get into all that. Does anyone else have any other questions or thoughts?
All right. Yeah, Kim. Hi, Joel. Thank you so much for being here, and it's good to see everyone that's here today. I'm a little over 10 years post my accident, and I just learned about a month and a half ago from seeing a neurosurgeon for the first time, who took the time to look at my initial images after the accident, that I had a right brain bleed, and he diagnosed me with a severe traumatic brain injury. So, and as I've just been pushing myself, but the connections haven't been happening as quickly as I would like. And I talk fine, but my connections aren't really there. At 10 years, is it still possible to have some benefits from hyperbaric?
Emphatically, yes. The Israelis tend to stop at 5, and I know why. I've talked to some of them. They want the best results, and sooner is better with all medicine. But the answer is emphatically yes. Some of the people who've experienced almost mind-blowing improvement have done so decades after the injury. I mentioned Joe Namath, and that was cute. I am a Jet fan. We went to the Joe Namath football camp, my son and I, and we're in awe of him. But he had, nobody knows how many concussions he had, and he was
Wasn't he? Yeah.
Well, at least.
Wasn't he a Baltimore Colt as well?
No, God forbid. No, he beat the Colts
No.
in
Oh,
03
that was oh, wait a minute, you're
Unitas.
Johnny
You're thinking
Unitas.
Johnny
Okay.
Unitas, yeah.
Thanks.
So, but
Thanks. Good flashback. Thank you so much.
you bet. And he's made this public, so I'm not telling out of school. He was really getting demented, seriously. Extremely forgetful. He was lost. He was in a fog. And he'd heard about HBOT. I wish he could have said he heard about it from me. He did hear about it from me, but I don't think I was the one who made the difference. He then took a bunch of dives. He's taken a lot of dives, I believe over 200. I'm not up to date. He took a ton of dives. My son had over 200. We had a lot of time to do it. And he made huge improvement, huge. And he says global, everything, executive function. The fog is almost entirely gone. And now he's got a second career selling stuff on TV, right? But he can do it. He can make the ads for Medicare insurance or whatever the heck he's selling. And that's more than 40 years post-injury. I should say other NFL greats. One of them, well, he's not as well known, but a guy named George Vizga was a Super Bowl winner, but maybe a decade or so after Namath. He had such brain injury on the field, it wasn't a matter of CTE, that he had 9 brain surgeries, most of them to replace defective shunts. But he did hundreds and hundreds of dives. He recovered, got a college postgraduate degree, is a consultant now. And his therapy, he only began his therapy, his hyperbaric therapy, I believe, more than 30 years post-injury. He just published a book just now. I think he had his book party recently. I correspond with him. So the answer is, like with anything, sooner is better. But you can anticipate. We can't say exactly what. Every scientist I ever asked, including Dr. Feingold, who was the one who helped BART all those years ago, they always say, well, we can't predict exactly. For instance, BART, to the day he died, had hemanopsia, brain blindness. was completely blind to the right side, so his eyes were fine. And I always ask, well, you think it'll help his hemanopsia? He said, there's no way to predict. So it never helped his hemanopsia, but it let him walk, it let him talk, it let him tell jokes, it let him do math. He graduated high school. He even went to college. Now he couldn't get through college. He found he just didn't have the self-control to do college. But he had a positive experience there. At this day, there's a brick on their walkway with his name and all that on it. So yeah, 10 years is not too late. I would definitely look into it.
Thank you.
The oxygenation, the data showing the blood flow changes,
Oh, yeah.
the brain is made of this lipid bilayer where the whole, it's not just, it's basically the infrastructure of it, but what happens across those layers is extremely complicated and thousands upon thousands of things. Needless to say, within this discussion and what you presented, there is a view image of thinking about what changes in the brain with brain injury, which is still invisible to the methods that are out there. PET scans only show certain activities, certain metabolic changes. Anyway, so across time, you're still there. Our brains are still there. I can only imagine that no matter how long it takes, it will still have the same benefits, but it's hard to get to. It's hard to, the time commute, there's all these issues here. And most of the people that are here in this talk series I've spoken to, they have hardly the resources to get their basic function to happen, let alone to fight to get to this. So yeah, it's really a ridiculous situation.
Okay, so I'm Ruth and I'm at the Hilliard Center. How much oxygen can you get from doing lots and lots of personal exercise every day? Can you get enough additional oxygen that it makes a difference?
Joel?
Dan, you probably know more than I do about this.
Well, I was going to say two things, and then please add any thoughts, Joel.
Yeah.
Oxygen, I don't think is increasing oxygen on its own. It's activating and causing you to. There's the functionality of the exercise. There's a vascularization. There's overall metabolic benefits. Then there's later neurotrophic benefits that come from the exercise. That is why it is beneficial. And oxygen blood flow it's not increased, but it's highly being replenished. So it has really good benefits. Exercise was my alternative therapy across my recovery and improvement because I had to use it every time I got tired and even start to inch towards the fatigue. You take a break and I just get on the bike or do some basic weights. So it has a lot of benefits. Also, the question earlier about Wim Hof breathing, he is hyper oxygenating his body to some extent through physiological breathing. So that is a method that does increase oxygen in your brain. It probably has good benefits, but I don't think it hasn't been studied, let alone for brain injury. So yeah, exercise is beneficial, but it's not doing what HBOT is doing. You should still exercise. It's good for us. It's one of the best things for us, I think. Joel, any thoughts?
Well, as I say, definitely exercise is beneficial for everyone, especially for someone who's had a neurological injury. What they have found with HBOT, even at the lower levels, even if you can only get a 1.3 atmosphere, I talked to practitioners that's all they've got. They're treating their patients with a soft chamber 1.3. You are increasing the oxygen. Now, is it just as Daniel was saying, it's more complicated than just revascular. The hyperbaric oxygen reduces inflammation and tends, the phrase they use, to douse the cascade of other catabolic processes. So it helps the brain be healthier. And some of these really complex connections that Daniel is referencing, we don't know at what point exactly, because the brain is too complicated. We don't know that much. At what point, when these inflammations and so on are doused, at what point the broader connections can be reestablished. I mean, I think the same can be said for some of these other therapies. The photobiomodulation that we've talked about, they talk about energizing the mitochondria, improving the ATP, and so on. And, again, it's probably more complicated than that. One thing I would say, Kim, the fish oils, and you can look at our site, and you can go to the library. They probably have Mike Lewis's book. It's called When Brains Collide, Michael Lewis. This is available. It's cheap. Basically, you can get it at any vitamin shop. Although, like everything else, you can do better. Lewis suggests going to a little more trouble, making sure it's double distilled to remove the bad stuff, and if possible, restored to its original form and whatnot. He makes some specific recommendations rather than just rushing to Walmart and buying any fish oils. But even if you get the best, and we got it for BART, and my wife and I are still on it. We take it ourselves every day with breakfast.
Yeah, I'm on high grade omega-3s ever since the accident double hit, as somebody with Alzheimer's would be. So somebody got me on that right away. I've been taking it ongoing.
Yeah,
for 10 years.
That's good stuff. And look, you all of us probably need to take fish oils for the rest of our lives, but it's affordable. Yeah, the same question you asked me about, is it too late? Well, I've seen it asked even on a webinar that we did with this woman, Anita Saltmarsh. She was asked, and she has found in her work and in the work at the VA, and there's a couple of big hospitals in Boston that did a lot of the original work on photobiomodulation, including the Harvard University Hospital. She says also sooner is better, but after a decade or two even, they see good results with photobiomodulation.
Thanks. That's important to say that, and to have them say it too is helpful. One more thing I wanted to add, because I realized that when I talk about exercise as beneficial, I've met many people who are like, "Oh, the exercise is too much for their system." I don't know. It's a mixed bag of brain injury issues, but I think across all of these, because there could be a detriment, or you could be one in whatever 1,000 that has this negative effect from it. We got to be aware of what our bodies are feeling, and also starting really slow. In a perfect world with brain injury stuff, you baby step, or really, really just start with almost nothing, repeating that enough, because it's our nervous system that is injured, and it's really hard to deal with. So for exercise, for anything, except maybe for sleep, because we all need sleep. But yeah, thank you, Joel. I think we've gotten into a lot of stuff here. I actually want to re-listen, and then maybe we'll do a part 2, or we can just record you and I, because I got a bunch of stuff I would like to share with you.
Okay.
I mean, part 2 would be good.
Good. I need to be wrapping up pretty soon anyway.
Thank you.
And thank you for all attending. You've all been very thoughtful and very wonderful listeners. And Dan, thanks for hosting this. And I'm not averse to doing a part 2.
Great.
The time is right. Okay.
I could come up with specific questions. Thank you, Joel. All right, I think I'm going to end it too, because we have been here for a while. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Joel.
You bet.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.